I first became interested in the link between video games and language learning when I came home from work one day to find my then 4.5-year-old daughter happily playing video games on a Korean website. Now, I'm not sure if the site had the option to change the language to English, but if it did, my daughter certainly hadn't needed to use it. In spite of the fact that she speaks no Korean, she was totally immersed in the game. And when I asked her how she knew what she was supposed to be doing, she turned around, looked at me as if I'd completely lost the plot and said, "It's obvious, isn't it?" Which was very true for her. But I do remember wondering how many of my friends or colleagues, or if I myself would have found it quite so obvious, or if we'd have been searching for the site's language options or reaching for our Korean English dictionaries. And then I remember thinking about how, if my daughter had been learning Korean at the time, this would have been a wonderful opportunity for her to practice all of the language she'd been learning in class. The thing is that my daughter and many of her friends have grown up in connected homes that have had broadband internet access since they can remember, and where they sometimes even have their own PCs or other mobile computing devices. And this is why they seem to be more comfortable with and skilled in the digital world. It's not that they have any kind of genetic predisposition to being able to use digital devices or the net any better than you or I. It's just that in their lives, these things have always existed. And in many cases, they began to use them before they could even read. So for today's young people, click and see what happens is often the best way of learning something new. It's the way they've always learned, by doing and experimenting, rather than listening to an explanation of something or reading the manual. Getting back to the topic of video games and language learning, games provide exposure to language, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit, but always present. And there's a clear link between exposure to language and successful language learning experiences. If we're honest, an hour in the classroom 3 times a week is not really long enough for anyone but the most linguistically intelligent of students to learn a foreign language to any great degree of proficiency, however hard their teachers work. But how many of those same students are spending many hours each week playing video games, often in English? Well, in a study I conducted in 2010 with almost 100 children and young people from across Latin America between the ages of 3 and 21, I found that 94% of them played video games every single day, for a staggering 88 minutes on average. That's every single day. And if we consider that a great number of video games, especially flash games for kids, Facebook games and online role-playing games for teens and adults are in English, this adds up to a significant amount of extra linguistic contact time for English language learners. However, when I asked the respondents if their schools used or at least promoted the use of video games as a linguistic reinforcement and extension tool, the answer I received was a resounding no. Perhaps the problem is that video games have a generally negative image amongst parents and educators. They're often perceived as being full of violence or negative messages, and especially as being a waste of time. How many teenagers have been punished for poor school performance by having their game console taken away from them, or their game playing time restricted? How many times a day, all around the world, is this phrase repeated? You can play video games after you've finished your homework. But what if the video games were the homework? My daughter is fortunate enough to be growing up in a bilingual Spanish-English environment, but none of her friends are, and their parents sometimes ask me what they can do to help their kids learn English more effectively. Let them play more video games, as long as they're in English, I reply, to reactions of shock on the faces of the parents. This wasn't really what they were expecting to hear, but when you break it down, there's a lot of sense in that statement. First off, time. Many children spend significant amounts of their leisure time playing video games, and they do it willingly, without any pressure from their parents or teachers. And depending on the content of the video game, of course, it may well be having a positive effect on their intellectual development. For example, an English language student playing a game in English will be in contact with the language and practicing it for many extra minutes or even hours a day. They'll be exposed to the language they already know, and they'll also be exposed to language that they don't know, thus increasing their vocabulary and helping them to work out how to express themselves better. Secondly, community. As families become smaller and children are allowed out to play less and less unsupervised, it's important that we find other ways of providing them with collaborative social learning environments. This is less about learning new facts and more about learning how to coexist with others in positive, unsupervised situations where they have to use and share their knowledge for the good of the group. Thirdly, engagement. Let's be honest, homework has never been particularly engaging. And in today's world, more than ever before, a black and white Times New Roman, or even Arial for that matter, 12-point font, photocopied homework on paper is not really going to cut the mustard when it's competing for children's attention with full-colour 3D surround sound, highly immersive virtual environments, or even movies on high-definition screens. I'm not saying, of course, that teachers need to become skilled programmers or filmmakers to get students to engage with their homework, and much less that what's been done already is bad. But what I am saying is that it is important for us to try to find alternative means of engaging our students and catching their attention that compete on a more level playing field with the entertainment options available to them. A number of studies have looked at the topic of video games and education in recent years. One that I found especially interesting was Gauntlet and Jackson's 2008 study of a BBC online world called Adventure Rock. They identified a number of benefits related to playing video games, including the development of transferable skills for adult life, the encouragement of collaborative social interaction, high levels of motivation, and a clear sense of identity. They also found that there are a number of clearly identifiable types of gamer, something that could be equated to Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences and used to enhance children's learning experience. Another paper worth mentioning, although far too extensive to go into in any great detail here, is the Pew Internet and American Life Project study entitled Teens, Video Games and Civics, that looked at the social nature of gaming and reported interesting data related to how, when, where, and with whom teenagers play video games, and the effect of this play on their social interaction. Putting all of this together, I suggest that to begin with, teachers perform regular audits of their students' after-school activities, especially related to the video games they're playing. And then they investigate the content of these games to see which of them could possibly make a positive contribution to the language learning process. Perhaps it could be for linguistic extension, or maybe just valuable extra practice and exposure. Students should be encouraged to share gaming experiences in class, and when playing video games, to note down new words or words in new contexts that they're unfamiliar with. These experiences can then be used by educators to enhance learning within very active, engaging environments. Of course, we shouldn't abandon what we already do, both in and outside the classroom, and it is important that we continue to provide students with meaningful learning experiences that follow established curricular structures. However, using video games can allow us to adapt and change the way that learning is actually delivered, as well as dynamizing how and when students interact with it. With this in mind, I think that exploring the wealth of English language video games available today, many of them for free online, gives us a way of adding enormous value to the English language learning process. Just imagine a child, when told to stop playing video games and do her homework, being able to respond, "But I am doing my homework." And it goes without saying she's having a lot of fun at the same time. There's a brave new world of video gaming out there, and it's our responsibility to the students of today and tomorrow to embrace it and apply it to helping them learn more effectively.